the WPATH Files. Marci Bowers might be a castration fetishist.
You could be a porn star for all the photos we take.
Eunuch Identity. We can't imagine anything worse than having my balls chopped off. With one client, we worked on all alters consenting to HRT before it was started. They had alters who were both male and female genders. They, them. Shocker. Regrettably declined writing only one letter, mainly because the person evaluated was in active psychosis. Really? Detransitioner. Acknowledgement that detransition exists to even a minor extent is considered off limits. Patients need to own and take active responsibility for the medical decisions. That is like next level. Removal of genitals so that you just have a smooth groin. Excuse me, but not all women can give birth? Yeah, we know. You could pick someone off the street, probably do better. Puberty blockers more broadly to all cisgender kids. That is like serious dystopian. It just seems like body shaming. Is the risk of bad surgical outcome or morbidity significantly increased by obesity? Yes, is the answer. Obese, and you want your breasts removed, like how much is that going to improve your chest area? Seriously harmed hundreds if not thousands of people and minors. How fucked are we? Hey everyone, how are you? Oh, you're not good? Well, no one's forcing you to listen, but if you are good, welcome back to the Jack Jewell podcast. You are very welcome. Just me today. I've been following this format of an interview and then just me talking about some headlines, woke TikToks, then an interview, so on. So let me know if you are enjoying that, and you are very welcome to be back here with me. I'm very happy. If you are new, then welcome to the family. Whether you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or watching on YouTube, I am very excited for today's episode. And you know what? Every week in my mind, I'm just thinking, I really need to kind of explore some other topics instead of all the transgender stuff. And, you know, to be fair, last week I did talk about the Israel-Palestine stuff, more so the Islamic comments from the Tory government. But I just feel like on a weekly basis, so much happens in this gender space. It's absolutely insane. That will probably die down one day, but there were some topics today I just could not avoid. So we're going to kick off with the WPATH Files, and I'm sure most of you are aware of what this is because it has been probably one of the most impactful and massive developments in the transgender conversation, possibly ever. I'm not sure. And I'm very much hoping that this will have a real impact on how we look at transgender healthcare moving forward, in particular trans healthcare for minors. So I'll explain more about my thoughts about that as we go. But for those of you who don't know what this is, the WPATH Files were released on the 4th of March. And this consists of a full 72-page report by a journalist called Mia Hughes, who works for the Environmental Progress Organization. So they're a nonpartisan research and think tank. They cover lots of other kind of human rights and environmental issues as well. But she produced a fantastic report, and this consists of an analysis of the files leaked from the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. So they are essentially the global organization, healthcare organization that set the expert standards and best practices for transgender health. And obviously it sounds lovely and shiny, and obviously these are the people who we need to get our advice from, but it has been long known that this organization has been corrupted by activists and people who are not neutral, not providing neutral medical care and objective medical care, scientific medical care for the best person, but instead are pushing an agenda which is entirely motivated by ideological purposes, that being gender identity and the whole transgender conversation. So none of it, you'll see more here, but Mia Hughes, I recommend reading this report because I read the whole thing, and it was both extremely compelling, but also extremely disturbing, unfortunately, and sad in a way. I mean, I think within this conversation, I'm always sort of hoping that some of the things I learn and the opinions I have about all of this are perhaps overinflated. And that is because I would rather less harm come to young gay kids in particular. But I've not really seen anything to refute that. Things have just got worse and worse and worse. I would recommend you reading the report at least, because she deep dives on all the analysis. She explains how this organization is not evidence-based, so none of their healthcare recommendations and guidelines are actually based in the scientific method and how we accurately conduct experiments, randomized control trials to then arrive at a robust and rigorous form of treatment, which has a known rate of risks and side effects, which outweigh the benefits most of the time. And she also explains how it is riddled with ethical concerns. They're not following any ethical procedures, it seems, except the philosophy that the care is life-saving. And she also has a fantastic section where she compares this medical scandal, if you want to call it that, which I believe it is, with past medical scandals based in pseudoscience, such as lobotomies, where they removed part of your frontal lobe in your brain for people they thought were mentally very unstable, which left them just pretty much passive and apathetic, mentally stunted. She also talked about the ovariotomy. I'm definitely pronouncing that wrong, but this was essentially when women started getting their ovaries removed because of hysteria, basically meaning they were anxious, going through an anxiety spell, and it was thought that their ovaries might cause this. There's another comparison with, I'm going to pronounce this wrong a little as well, apotemophilia, which is the desire to have one of your limbs removed or multiple because of a paraphilia. Very similar to autogynephilia because it is an attraction towards yourself without a limb. So in being an amputee, and several doctors actually did complete these procedures. And then finally, there's also a past study she talks about in the engineering of children's height. So they've used puberty blockers in the past and hormones to essentially stop girls from being too tall and stop boys from being too short. And then the various complications and side effects that preceded that by playing God. So what I thought we could do today is look at some of these files, which the files today I'm going to look at are those of an internal messaging board. So WPATH has a community, an online forum where clinicians, supposed clinicians, but also you will see that if you look at the report, this organization is not just doctors and professionals, it's also activists, trans-identifying people, people from charities. All you have to do is pay a fee in order to join it, and then suddenly you can be on a community board advising surgeons some best practices when it comes to these permanent procedures. And something else I should add is that this organization is run by a transgender woman called Marci Bowers, and I've come across her so many times. You can see a lot of her comments within the files themselves, which are fascinating. But she is a gynecologist surgeon, obviously born male, and assumed autogynephilic because she's married to a woman. If you don't know what autogynephilia is, I've explained it way too many times to kind of waste time here, but I have other podcast episodes talking about it, so please go check those out. One of the leading causes of trans women, the motivations behind males becoming trans women, but she is known as well for being on the I Am Jazz reality TV show where Jazz Jennings transitioned throughout her childhood and had a vaginoplasty that resulted in 4 revision surgeries, and now she is anorgasmic, has no sexual desire, had her full puberty blocked. And she's known for a clip from that of saying to Jazz, oh, you must be ready to become a porn star with how many times your vagina has been photographed.
Let me just take a picture too. Poor thing, you could be a porn star for all the photos you're taking.
And this is talking to a minor. So it does make me suspicious that some of these activists may also possess a fetish. You can have this sort of fetish for feminizing other men and being attracted to trans women, but people have this eunuch fetish of not wanting testicles, and that's another really important thing because it's been known for quite a long time that WPATH is absolutely effed because in their recent standards of care they have a whole chapter on eunuch identity, which basically discusses someone whose gender identity is to be castrated and to not have balls. And all of these reasons why it is valid, why it is legitimate. And then they link in the guidelines to websites discussing eunuch identity. And then on those websites, it's very clear that it's underlaced with fetishism and actually links to more websites that discuss stories all surrounding the fetish of becoming a eunuch. We have some very odd fetishes in the human experience. I can't imagine anything worse, personally, than having my balls chopped off. But I do wonder if this Marci Bowers or other people actually have a fetish for removing others' genitalia, those being minors. Who knows? I think it could be an outrageous allegation for me to make, but I'm just saying it might be plausible. It's possible. Considering, I mean, think of all the other crazy fetishes there are. Why not this? Why are some of the activists potentially not in this for both their own transition, but then wanting to transition others for their, to get their kicks? Okay. So I've tried to kind of pull out some of the hottest takes from this, but to be honest, every messaging thread in this report and collection of files is equally as disturbing as the other. There are very few voices throughout the whole forum that provide voices of reason and balance. And if they do, they are very quickly shot down and implied or told that their views are bigoted or they can be used to spew anti-trans hate and weaponized. Insane. They also released a video which consists of Zoom recordings of some of the professionals working at this organization, and that has lots of scandalous stuff in as well. So if you enjoy this reaction, then please let me know if you want me to delve into that, because there would be lots of more interesting things to react to there. So let's get started. So the first section I picked out is on dissociative disorders, so psychiatric conditions of the clinicians talking about this. This comment says, trauma is common among trans clients. Several clients met the criteria for dissociative disorders, primarily OSDD, which stands for Other Specified Dissociative Disorder, which from my understanding is a kind of less severe version of DID, and DID, Dissociative Identity Disorder. I swear these things are tongue twisters, but this is when someone essentially has split personalities. And there has been a recent epidemic of this via TikTok and people diagnosing themselves with this. It's also disputed within the mental health community whether this is even a real thing. So I don't know much more about it than that, but obviously people who are claiming to have this or have this are hella sick, right? And they need help. Either way. Back to the comment, they say, whether there has been any difficulty with the system agreeing to transitioning medically, especially given that not all of the alters have the same gender identity. So when they say alters, they're referring to the different personalities. So if I had split personalities and I had 3 different personalities, then I would have 3 alters, and one of them could be a woman or a dog, for example. Then the next comment says, I have noticed a high incidence of dissociative disorders amongst the trans community. How strange. Maybe you should look into that and question whether their trans identity is actually also part of this whole mental health disorder, part of having split personalities. But no, that's not what any of the people say. Another person says, I felt good calling it complex PTSD. I don't think surgeons would blink at that as much as DID. So you'll see throughout the files that they like to manipulate language and conversation in order to, first of all, not offend anyone, because medicine is obviously all about that, about lying to clients, to patients, and just not offending anyone, right? And also to remove any gatekeeping involved in patients going on hormones and surgery. So in this case, she's saying, if we told the surgeon this patient has DID, then they might not operate. So let's just rename it as something else. And then that's absolutely fine. Doctors. So has anyone ever gone to your general practitioner, or in America, you might call it like family doctor or something, but you want to get antibiotics because you had this cold that's not gone away for weeks. And then you're sort of actively trying to be more sick in the waiting room, or you might hold off your cough so you have like a good few to get out of your system when you're in there. I've done that before, but not recently, because I kind of know antibiotics are not good for you. However, this is kind of like that, but from a doctor. She's basically saying, okay, let's just twist the truth so that they're less likely to gatekeep. This comment says, with one client, we worked on all alters consenting to HRT before it was started. They had alters who were both male and female genders. Ethically, if you do not get the consent from all alters, you have not really received consent and may be open to being sued later. So instead of referring this person to a psychiatrist or a mental health institution, they decided instead, okay, so you've got split personalities, no problem. Let me just speak to each one individually and make sure that they're happy with you making permanent body modifications, permanent surgeries, which all have side effects and could limit your lifespan. Especially because you have a trans identity, which I'm going to assume is of the opposite sex, and then some of your alters are male and some of them are female. So if I was identifying as female, but then also had male alters, I'd have to check with them. By the way, I know that your personality is male, but are you kind of cool with the body that you exist in being female? And then you see the underlying tone of, well, you have to do this to not be sued. The concepts of adult autonomy and competency are important here. These questions don't come up with heterosexual cisgender people who can afford it requesting lip plumping procedures, nor when a person with DID requests such a procedure. Yeah, the reason is because, first of all, you claim that your medical procedures are life-saving, and you are a medical organization. You are doctors. So you cannot compare that with getting your lip filler, because lip filler is purely cosmetic, and they contradict themselves time and time again with this, referring to plastic surgeries and like Brazilian butt lifts and all those kind of things, which are all elective cosmetic surgeries, but they claim that patients need these, otherwise they are at high risk of suicide. And you'll see that mentioned all over this report and the files, all over, even though there's no scientific basis for it, and it is entirely unproven. And if your patients be having, you know, DID and schizophrenia, then, and they, you know, off themselves, then maybe there's more to it than gender dysphoria, than simply gender dysphoria. Honestly. But comparing it to then the lip plumping procedures is entirely moot, right? Because then they're kind of implying that the trans healthcare decisions are elective, which in many cases they are. I understand that's a very complex conversation there, so I'm not going to go into that, but it's full of hypocrisy and contradictions. This final one says, there is a robust community developing of people identifying as quote unquote plural, and there are now plural positivity conferences. So this means, I gather, people with DID and have multiple personalities are now saying, you know, my personality is my choice, obviously, or you don't need to fix DID so that you can contently just be one person instead of 8. But instead, they've now called themselves plural to obviously remove the stigma. And they are having plural positivity conferences. Just the fact that DID implies multiple identities, and you are providing medical healthcare to treat cross-sex identity, or an identity which does not apparently align with your assigned sex at birth, how can you justify providing it because they have multiple identities? Surely if they are male wanting female hormones and they have some male identities, some female identities, you can say, well, you know, considering you have many male identities, is there any chance you'd like to stay male? Because otherwise you are becoming a medical patient for life. You're becoming a slave to Big Pharma for life. You may have complications. You may develop cancer long-term from cross-sex hormones. But you'll find that the cisgender identity is always looked down upon by these people, and it's never considered progressive to consider that a patient may actually find comfort with their cisgender identity instead of becoming a medical patient for life. So I'm going to move on to the topic of trauma, which is sort of related, but this clinician says PTSD MDD, major depressive disorder, observed dissociations are present in a patient. Recent personality traits suggested schizoid typical traits, so schizophrenia, I assume. Psychiatry is recommending holding off. Shocker. Oh my God, can you imagine? This case has me perplexed, struggling internally what is the right thing to do. What amuses me reading this report is that I'm not a medical professional, and I honestly think if someone put a gun to my head and said, you need to assess all these trans-identifying patients and try and choose the right option for them, I would still do better than all of these deranged activists. There's not a chance. I mean, I probably wouldn't do great because I'm not a medical professional, but anyone could deduce that you would probably do better. You could pick someone off the street and say, oh, listen, so I have this patient who has PTSD, major depressive disorder, and schizophrenia, and they want to transition, take hormones, but a mental health expert doctor, a psychiatrist is telling me not to, but I'm just struggling internally what to do. That person would say, why are you practicing this? Like, what is wrong with you? Are you for real? I can't. So the next comment says, I'm missing why you are perplexed. Do we need to read it again? Does the mental illness impair the ability to give informed consent? The mere presence of psychiatric illness should not block a person's ability to start hormones if they have persistent gender dysphoria, capacity to consent, and the benefits outweigh the risks. So another thing I observed throughout this is they can always justify the medical care because they never think that gender dysphoria can be a comorbidity to other disorders. They never think that gender dysphoria is anything but something innate that someone's born with, and they are destined to develop a trans identity. Therefore, they have to be given the care. And this is why they can justify everything. And what's super disturbing is that reading all these messages, you actually can see that most of these doctors, if not all of them, think they're doing the right thing. People who have studied 4 years, gone to medical school, in some cases become surgeons, who are highly, highly, highly intelligent, and their indoctrination is so robust that they can believe they are doing the right thing when they are suggesting someone with schizophrenia, all these, DID, MDD, have their penis removed. Like, that is seriously fucked up. That is like next level. And it goes to show one thing you can learn from this whole scandal is that no matter how smart you are always vulnerable of being indoctrinated into a cult. It doesn't matter. And you know who is especially vulnerable is autistic people because of their inclination to think in black and white terms. So that's why we see so many trans kids in particular having autism, or trans people in general. Check out my previous episode with Dr. Az Hakim, who he talks about how the majority of his patients were on the autistic spectrum and why this develops a trans identity a lot of the time in gender non-conforming people. But so this comment says, this is a harm reduction, and so doing nothing is not a neutral option. Yes, agreed. However, doing nothing could also look like referring them to expert mental health people, finding perhaps a way to relieve the schizophrenia and PTSD and MDD first before saying, okay, is gender dysphoria still a thing? Do you still want this? Getting them on the right combination of medications. But no, they just see any inclination to deny the healthcare as gatekeeping and high risk. You'll always say that, do the benefits outweigh the risks? I don't see the only key place in this whole report that you see them saying the benefits don't outweigh the risks is when you have a man, a trans woman, trans identifying male saying that he wants to lactate and take a combination of hormones to produce breast milk. And they regrettably all have to say that this is not ethical because the only reason that you would do this is because you have a baby. But what they all know is that it is a fetish. And he is aroused at the idea of lactating. Meanwhile, in the last 15 years, I had to regrettably decline writing only one letter, mainly because the person evaluated was in active psychosis. Let that sink in for a moment. And hallucinated during the assessment session. So, one thing that jumps out to me is being one of these clinicians, having to do this job. I would be scared as shit having all these patients coming into me with, dissociative disorders, hallucinating during the sessions, evidence of self-harm, of eating disorders. Like, that would be, maybe that's just why I'm not a medical professional, but that would be very, very disturbing. And then having to speak to someone with multiple personalities and get consent from each one, how crazy disturbing would that be? I would say, no thanks. I don't want to talk to, your John and your Bethany and your Rachel today. No thanks. But in actual fact, they probably are so excited by this new opportunity. And we see how, while being a doctor is an honorable thing to do, and we need medical professionals, you are prone to the vulnerability of playing God and developing an ego that you are this savior that is here to do these surgeries and save people. And that's no disrespect to doctors. There's many doctors, the majority of doctors are not like that. But I feel like if you become a doctor, you need to really work on your humility and just always be questioning yourself that you are doing the right thing. I have a lot of experience as a patient with doctors, and I've seen them, from what I can see, getting into kind of like a humdrum when they specialize in something, of kind of just following the same patterns of thought, deductions, to diagnose everything and treat. And while obviously that is important, it's like there needs to be far more questioning and interest in patients to learn more, But I think a lot of them get comfortable and kind of don't necessarily want to keep growing and learning. So I think that is a serious risk, especially if you become a surgeon. I've heard that surgeons have a high rate of psychopaths, but then I've also heard people say that's entirely unfounded. So who knows? Let me know if you know any more about that. But this person, clearly, if you have regrettably in 15 years only had to decline writing one letter to refer for hormones and or surgery, then maybe you have a bias. Because in the field of medicine, that does not happen. You don't just happen to have 1,000, however many patients walk through your door, and 999 of them be, oh, yep, you're right. You do have gender dysphoria. Yep, that's the best thing for you. Like, are you for real? I bet most of you have gone to the doctor thinking you have something and then realizing, actually, it's not that, it's that. It's just that these clinicians don't question themselves is so effed up. This thread is really sad. It's about cancer. So the clinician says that a patient developed hepatic adenomas. I hope I'm saying that right, but 2 liver masses of cancer, essentially. And they also say the oncologist and surgeon both have indicated that they are likely offending agents of the hormones. So the hormones, the cross-sex hormones, have caused cancer in not an old person, but this is one of the risks of cross-sex hormones and the lack of long-term studies they have of people that have taken these drugs for decades. And there's probably not enough conversation with patients on the possibility of that. But I heard one of the clinicians say this there was an expose of this on GB News, which is the only news outlet in the UK that has profiled it to that extent. So Andrew Doyle, a gay man who presents on that, said, in my whole time as a journalist, this would be front page news on every paper and on every news outlet. The BBC, which is our supposedly non-partisan, neutral, publicly funded news body in the UK, hasn't written one article about this. Not one. And they've happily written articles about trans healthcare, trans activism, trans rights. But this huge medical scandal, for which there is very much concrete evidence that patients have been harmed and not treated, at least not being treated in a scientific, medicinal, ethical way. They've not reported on it. So what does that tell you? And instead, it's GB News, which I don't have a problem with. And I actually get lots of my clips from there because they actually platform people that no other news out will, such as Helen Joyce and other speakers in the space. But most of the people in the UK will think GB News is a far right, like fascist news outlet. I was once talking to a gay friend, sort of new friend, but who's very left. And I was kind of trying to like tap into this story a bit, just like a few things here or there. And I mentioned Good Morning Britain and an interview I saw on that, and his face like dropped. It was like I had committed some sort of offense. He looked up on his phone saying, oh my God. Oh, sorry. I thought you were talking about GB News. And then, even though to me, GB News would be no different, I was like, no, oh my God, no. Because listen, you have to pick your battles with these people, but it's actually scary being in one of those scenarios where you are like, is this person going to stand up and walk out of this restaurant? Because I watched an episode of GB News and a guy commented on a recent, the last podcast I did with Dr. Az Hakim, all these opinions. And I said, have you listened to it? And it turns out he hadn't watched it. And he said, do you not vet people before you bring them on? Do you not read their website? Because, in his opinion, Dr. Az Hakim is not appropriate and he's anti-trans and he hates trans people, doesn't want them to exist. But my reply was, but that should be immaterial unless this person is, hardcore anti-Semite or hardcore fascist or communist. I think there's lots of people who I can easily disagree with, and I'll happily have them on and interview them and ask them questions. Same thing with watching GB News or any other news outlet. It's people who feel so strongly in their ideology, political ideology, who should watch Fox News and GB News to see what they're saying. Because you can watch something and say, no, I disagree with that. But instead, it's any association is just seen to be, oh my God, you're a fascist. That was a big tangent. Where was I? So, patient that developed cancer. Another clinician said, to my best knowledge, it was linked to his hormonal treatment. So they were saying, I've had also this experience. He was in midlife. Unfortunately, I don't have much more detail since it was so advanced that he opted for palliative care and died a couple months after. How tragic. Heart goes out to that person. Oh, yeah. So I mentioned GB News because there was a medical expert on that, or a doctor perhaps, and she said, in any field of medicine, we're always trying to seek truth. And if something like this arises, like, oh, we have patients dying of cancer because of this treatment, that is just goes without saying, we need to put pause on this, take a step back and try and figure out what the risk, what the rate of risk there is. How common is this? Like, do more studies, but WPATH are just like, oh, shame. Yeah. Shame. But it's life-saving, and we need to give every patient, unless they're having active hallucinations in your appointment, the drugs, right? There is a huge section on detransitioners, which I think if you want to read the report, I definitely recommend looking at that. They kind of group all the comments on this internal chat board into categories, which is great. So there's a whole section on that, the mental health stuff, the trauma, then there's a whole section on this detransition. So the way they talk about detransitioners is, to me, it just reads evil. But this person says, I have a 17-year-old FTM detransitioner, and even though they've said they're detransitioning or they're a detransitioner, they continue to say he, him, which is totally contradictory to their respect people's identities. But anyway, he is very distraught and angry. He reports that he feels he was brainwashed and upset by the permanent changes to his body. Not surprised, because you're all activists, because they probably got advice online from other activists that all their problems would be solved if they transitioned. Very sad. And none of them lead with compassion. Oh my gosh, that sounds terrible. I'm so sorry this happened to him. But a lot of them mentioned, oh, they probably got involved in anti-trans hate groups. So listen to this comment. This reads to me as a patient who feels they have lost agency around their transition, and it's likely that therapy is the most appropriate place for them to explore this. With depressed patients whose symptoms improve in treatment and suddenly doubt they ever had depression to begin with, thus wanting to abandon the very treatment that provided this relief. So even in the case of someone who has detransitioned, is completely distraught, completely angry, saying it was the wrong decision, I felt brainwashed, this person is saying, no, they're probably just realizing, oh, my dysphoria is gone. I didn't need to be a man. I needed to just be a woman. And now which doesn't make any sense, by the way, because surely if you have dysphoria and then you become male and then your dysphoria goes away, your conclusion would be, oh, right, this was the right thing for me. And it's such a bad comparison, because if you're depressed and then you go on antidepressants or you get therapy and then you think, oh, maybe I wasn't even depressed, and then you go off the antidepressants and stop therapy, you've not made any permanent changes, first of all, or most likely you haven't, but also you can just go back on the antidepressants, go back to therapy. With this girl has facial hair and her voice has deepened forever, and this clinician is saying, oh, well, no, she probably just needs to reevaluate and stay trans. Absolutely insane. The history of pathologizing and medicalizing transgender identity, the idea of detransition often makes it feel like a mistake. Yes. Has been made in some capacity. It is okay for gender and interest in medical options to change over time for each individual. So if they acknowledge that your interest in gender, it's not even gender identity, interest in gender, but your identity, your medical options, if they acknowledge that those desires change over time, then how can they claim that this care is life-saving, needed urgently, innate? You see, it's all hypocritical. And that is, I'm sorry, but if you're religious, but when you become religious and you look at the doctrine and the things people say about the doctrine and the philosophies people have, there's always contradictions, but you stay in that ideology because you do not question those things. And it's rude to question those things. It's rude to say, wait, but hang on, if, God says this, but then he also says that, like, how do those two things marry up? That's just kind of something you don't really do. At least I'm probably being so ignorant. If you're religious and you sit around debating these hypocritical things all the time, then please let me know. But I also appreciate some people just have a faith and they're less about like the rules of the religion, which is totally fine. But I think when you are in an ideology, it's very easy to even consciously decide, oh, la 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 la, I'm not going to listen. So that's why we need to try and get as many activists or people who believe in, wholeheartedly in gender medicine, that it's life-saving and that it's for everyone who wants it, to look at this report. So I think if any of you are in a conversation where you kind of put feelers of this out there and they disagree, then maybe just mention, oh, well, there was this big report released from the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, of which all the clinics follow their guidelines, and leaks files, suggesting that actually there are lots of problems with healthcare and it's faulty. So I'd love to send that to you and you can have a look. I will put the link for this in the description. Definitely check it out. But where was I? So they say it can change over time, but then that's fine to do permanent things. I think about many of the irreversible procedures that we allow adults to easily access in our society, tattoos, plastic surgery. So again, they are referring to elective treatments while simultaneously holding the belief that their treatments are life-saving, medical, necessary, and urgent. doesn't add up, right? So if I went to the doctor and I said, or if I went to a plastic surgeon and said, so I want a nose job, but some days I feel like I want a big nose and some days I feel like I want a small nose, then he'd say, oh, well, yeah, that's fine because it's about what you want today, even though it changes over time. So I'll do a reversible surgery. The president of WPATH, Marci Bowers, the person I think might be a castration fetishist, acknowledgement that detransition exists to even a minor extent is considered off limits for many in our community. So if you are doctors and medical professionals, your desire to use a certain form of treatment should be neutral, because if you become an ear, nose, and throat surgeon, your desire should be to help people have better functioning ear, noses, and throats. But if you have one type of surgery that you're just so obsessed with and you love so much, even though it always goes wrong and you have a very high regret rate, then it's very clear that you have a bias, because all doctors should be interested in is improving patients' lives and restoring patients' health. But the very fact that they can see there's a flaw in this healthcare, but we'd prefer not to acknowledge it because it is considered off limits for many in our community. You are not a doctor. That is not the attitude of a scientist or a doctor. Scientists, when they do an experiment, I mean, they may sort of may sort of hope for a certain outcome, but their experiment should certainly be completely neutral and allow for any outcome to occur that, exists in reality. I do see talk of the phenomenon as distracting from the many challenges we face. Patients need to own and take active responsibility for the medical decisions, especially those that have potentially permanent effects. Okay, so the president of this healthcare provider, again, life-saving, necessary, urgent, protect trans kids. But then people who are misled or realize it was a mistake, it's their responsibility. So if I go to the doctor and they say, I recommend you need this treatment because of X, and then it turns out further down the line that actually that was completely wrong, they misdiagnosed me, then they are not going to say to you, oh, well, you could have said no. That would be a case in which I could sue them. Sure, if it was an elective surgery, if it was lip filler, then they could say, well, it was your decision. I agree with that. But we have this crossover here, which is why so much of trans healthcare is in fact elective and is in fact a trend. Just the fact that they can so easily brush off those detransitioners and say, I see talk of the phenomenon, which is funny. Marci Bowers uses this word because phenomenon is supposed to describe something that is very peculiar, out of the ordinary, and sometimes not entirely explainable, I believe. Tell me if I'm wrong. But labeling detransition as a phenomenon, which is actually just someone identifying with their birth sex, and apparently that's a phenomenon. Surely it's a phenomenon to want to be the other sex. No. It's just so depressing. Here's a short one where they talk about a clinician saying that a surgeon or an endocrinologist is requesting a second reference letter to grant treatment. And a clinician says, this definitely sounds like extra gatekeeping. All the comments are just like 2 letters. I can't believe that. This is gatekeeping. This is life-saving. They're at risk of suicide if they don't get that letter soon. 2 letters for permanent medical interventions. That does not sound unreasonable to me. Then a clinician, professional, or, absolute weirdo replies, I am, and then lots of the names are redacted. So let's say I am June, they, them. Shocker. If you're interested in consultation with a provider of lived experience, I'm happy to chat further. I've written quite a few second letters and have written letters for minors as well. Where in any other field of medicine do you just find everyone working in it is like someone that suffers from it? Can you imagine if all of the heart surgeons were people with like heart failure? Or everyone that treats schizophrenia being schizophreniacs? Because I can't. Surely just that would be, okay, well, first of all, you may not be of the capacity to do this, but second of all, there's a slight chance that you might be biased in your advice. There is a very horrific section on non-binary gender medicine, which is totally effed, because while gender dysphoria is real and autogynephilia is real, which are sort of explained scientifically, I guess, through mental distress, so much of the non-binary shit is literally just the new goth and emo. And the fact that so many of these non-binary people are then getting double mastectomies with no nipples because it's trendy, and all of these crazy other surgeries, I just find it totally criminal. And all these girls, you know, straight girls dyeing their hair blue and being like, I'm queer, I'm LGBT, which I find so offensive, then are walking around with no nipples, which is just disturbing. I'm like, really? I'm supposed to relate to you because you are a blue-haired girl who, you know, likes to do magic in her spare time and is a communist and doesn't have nipples? Oh my God, that is so like me. I finally feel understood. Can I lick your non-nipple? So this surgeon, Thomas Satterwhite, and I looked up his website, and he does all the surgeries, you know, the vaginoplasties, the phalloplasties, and then some of the more niche ones. He says, I've found more and more patients recently requesting non-standard procedures such as top surgery without nipples, nullification, and phallus-preserving vaginoplasty. So for your information, this is so disturbing. Nullification is removal of genitals so that you just have a smooth groin with a little hole for a urethra. And that is supposed to be needed, life-saving medical care. And that is just so sad. This is like dystopian, where we are just turning people into robots. And someone can actually say, I fancy having zero genitals because I don't relate to men or women. How effed up. And some of these people are opting to be not able to orgasm. Like, how much of a sign that so many of these people are autistic than that, you know? Asexuality is so common in autistic people. So perhaps if they are asexual, then it doesn't really matter if they're not going to orgasm. But just to completely destroy someone's sexual functioning, at least in a vaginoplasty, they often retain the ability to orgasm. And some, particularly autogynephilic men, seem to really like their vaginoplasty. But this is essentially female genital mutilation like they do in Africa. And the most extreme version of that is where they actually sew the entire vulva together and all they have is a little hole. And then when this woman is supposed to be impregnated by her future husband or whatever, then he needs to break through that with his penis. And a lot of the time they require a knife. I'm sorry, trigger warning. I don't really like trigger warnings, so we're probably not going to do these on the channel. You know, you just need to kind of accept that you can't be shielded from everything in life. And if you don't like, then don't watch. But you should watch. So nullification's fucked up. And then phallus-preserving vaginoplasties where you have a bit of both. So you have your penis, but then you also have a bit of a vagina, which is totally bizarre. And apparently these people have existed for centuries. And there's always been people that desperately want both the penis and the vagina. This next comment kills me. So they say, I think it's important to recognize that not all people requesting non-standard procedures are non-binary and vice versa. When you group certain procedures as non-binary and others that are for binary genders, you risk patients feeling as though they have to ascribe to a certain category to get what they need. You can also see a trend throughout this of just these clinicians, i.e. activists, getting offended left, right, and center. It's like that excuse me, but not all women can give birth. Not all women have periods. Yeah, we know. And it's just this constant need to be so offended by everything. So this doctor is saying, oh yeah, I'm being requested for non-binary surgeries. And the other doctors are going, wait, whoa, back up. It's not just non-binary people who get these surgeries. They're also for binary trans people. It's like, who cares? You're talking about removing someone's entire genitals, and that's what you focus on. And they do this just to distract from the actual horror of what they're doing. And then later on, this surgeon is like so enthusiastic about these surgeries. And he's like, oh, I want to learn more. I want to share techniques of how to destroy someone's sexual production. And then he has a link to his website, which the link is now broken. Cheers. But he then calls it gender expansive bottom surgery. Like, how fucked are we? How fucked are we? And something else Mia reports in the report is that the medical industry has always, every couple of decades, had a scandal and then realized, well, what the hell was this? It really makes me question, and it worries me. Just stay with me here, but is there a chance that in the future there will be no trans healthcare anymore because they realize that actually the majority of people don't have improved cognition and mental health or satisfaction, and there isn't a scientific basis that these things work? That worries me because, first of all, I worry how this backlash is going to affect happy trans people. Other creators such as Blair White, Book Angel, Alexis Blake, Marcus Dibb. I do worry about that because while I think perhaps if they were given more exploratory help or help in another way at the time, they may not have gone down that path. They are still seem to be very happy with that decision. So perhaps there are more than one ways to treat a problem. And well, I mean, if they've had surgeries and are on hormones, then I don't think ethically they could then take their hormones away. But there clearly are people that are happy with this and they do have autonomy. So I just worry that there'll be a big backlash even for those people. And I think listening to Mia Hughes as well, so I really respect her, but she is of that critical opinion that this should not be done at all. But speaking to people who are autogynephilic and have intense dysphoria over their genitals, Anne Lawrence, for example, I haven't spoken to Anne, but have read, it seems like extreme dysphoria for those males in particular, surgery does tremendously help. Even if they don't transition, they just get the bottom surgery, which is also, potentially an option. So I do worry about that. And I also worry about facing a reality that perhaps for most cases, these treatments are actually not good. Because seeing some of the happy trans people online, like Blair White, who I love, favorite person in the world, but maybe they are not the majority, I wonder how common it is to find thriving people who've transitioned and have really successful careers, are really happy. I just question it, but I really hope that we get to a middle ground place where people who may benefit are given very comprehensive mental health care first and given an emphasis first on the desired outcome for everyone is to find a way of actually being very content in your biological sex, because then we avoid you becoming a medical case for life. And surely anyone would kind of agree with that. I mean, if you desperately want to transition, but then someone tells you actually one day you're going to be really happy just living as a male, then would they not opt for that? And then in some extreme cases, it might really help. That's what I want to believe. That's what I kind of, because I don't like the feeling of the prospects of everyone's been harmed by this. Every single person. That is scary to me. But obviously, I don't avoid reality. So whatever happens, I'm willing to change my mind about anything if the evidence is there. Speaking of that, another person is talking about exploratory therapy, and she says, what are your thoughts on encouraging puberty blockers more broadly to all questioning, or even perhaps to all cisgender kids? So her entire thread is about, do you guys have any experience with exploratory therapy? What are the pros and cons? Maybe doing exploratory therapy will increase the risk of suicide. And, make the patient distrust you. She's basically like looking for all the reasons why we should not do exploratory therapy. Are you serious? And then she says, what is your opinion on giving puberty blockers to all children, just in case your child might be trans? That is like serious dystopian. Can you imagine a future where we just give every child puberty blockers so that they can just decide what sex they want to be? That is so horrific that this doctor had this idea. And if anyone replied to that specifically, I don't think it's in the files. Or maybe it is, but I don't recall seeing it. And you can really see with this movement that it's with the queer theory that these people want to make everything queer, because heteronormative society is oppressive, quote unquote oppressive, and queerness is liberating. So if we can turn everyone queer, we will, because apparently that's the desired outcome, even though actually the majority of humankind seem to thrive in opposite sex relationships with nuclear families and good mental health. I feel like I would just wonder if it comes out of this queer theory and the queer community always trying to put their stamp on this need that we are queer and we somehow have a more fulfilling, fruitful life and have a more complex and deep view of culture, society, and the world because we're queer. And we feel so sorry for all those cis het people who have to live their boring lives with their boring mortgages and their boring kids and their boring cars and their boring corporate jobs. I wonder if it comes out of like a jealousy of people growing up feeling outcast, feeling different, and their access to becoming parents being very difficult to obtain, and their ability to find monogamy, especially if you're a gay man, being very, very difficult because everyone is in fluid, open relationships now. I just wonder if it comes deep down from jealousy of straight people. For me, I don't feel that whatsoever. I have a bit of both. I'm in a monogamous relationship. I have a more corporate-y job. But then I enjoy like quote unquote queer stuff, even though I don't relate to that word, and explore my sexuality, express myself, don't hold back from anything I want to do. And I feel so happy like that. That's just what I want. But I noticed, sorry, I know I'm going off another tangent here, but one of my criticisms of the LGBT community and circles I've been in is that conversations at parties and stuff often go to this territory of, oh my God, imagine being one of these like Jennifers with your second baby on the way and, the mortgage and the holiday to Malaga planned for the summer, like grim, It's always this need to look down on other people. But if you want equality, then you need to just trust that other people, if they're really happy, are happy. And, what am I even saying? Because I feel like I just spend my whole time on this podcast, my channel, judging everyone. But, I keep going off on so many tangents today. I'm sorry. Hopefully you are enjoying my babble. But hopefully we won't be giving all cis kids, I don't even like saying that. Hopefully we won't be giving all children in the future puberty blockers and ruining their fertility, because that'll be the end. That is like Handmaid's Tale level bizarreness. This is the last section I'm going to talk about, which is on fat phobia. Okay, so this person says, I'm interested in opening a discussion on the clinical relevance of maintaining a certain BMI as a prerequisite to surgery. The comment says, it just seems like body shaming. Can anyone explain why this matters? Is the risk of bad surgical outcome or morbidity significantly increased by obesity? Yes, is the answer. Again, I'm not a doctor, but when you are morbidly obese, surgery is very risky. And also, kind of maybe controversial take, but if you are obese and you want your breasts removed, like, how much is that going to improve your chest area? You know? Like, clearly there's a lot of material there and extra tissue there that just removing your breasts, like, you know, you're still going to have a lot of issues there. But, you know, that this is a massive risk to surgery. And then, of course, their first reply is they lead with their feelings for everything. It's always about, oh my God, that's fat shaming. This comment says, I have a client seeking top surgery and following a discussion about his eating disorder was told to lose weight. This triggered disordered eating. I've been thinking of approaching a surgeon who does not have a BMI limit. So just like all the other, there's so many trends here because, okay, my client has disordered eating and has responded really badly to our request to lose some weight for his surgery and he's really struggling. So maybe we should look into that and see if he can get some help with that before we cut off her breasts. I think, oh yeah, so it's a girl. And even though surgeons are saying no, then the answer is, well, how can we work around this? Because I don't like this. This doesn't align with my worldview. So let's work around it. It's like black market. And then finally, a reply from Marci Bowers, the president, says, high BMI is associated with lesser outcomes, longer operative times. We truly do not try to fat shame patients. So while it is associated with very negative ramifications, you should also take fat shaming into account. But if you're a doctor, it's not about shaming a patient. It's about saying, you're morbidly obese. Here are the risks. Sorry. If that person says, oh my God, fat phobia, then tough. Because there shouldn't be anything phobic about reality. And also, I'm not going to go into it here, but there is a great section at the end of conversations around autogynephilia because a couple of clinicians actually say, any advice for AGP? Probably not knowing how contentious it is because they have men coming in who are actively identifying as AGP, like self-aware AGP. It is a very crazy story, is taking hormones for 9 weeks to feminize himself and then going off the hormones for 9 weeks to enjoy getting a kick and arousal off that, because when you're on estrogen, it typically kills your sex drive. And he's been doing that for 15 years. And instead of the comment saying, oh, wait, maybe this is a sign that AGP is real, it's just, this is pseudoscience, it's been debunked with no explanations of why it's debunked. And then also other people saying, oh, perhaps this is a reflection of his inner trans misogyny and transphobia from society that he can't stick with his transition. Fuck off. How can you be so deranged and mentally unstable? I actually feel sorry for these doctors. Well, I mean, stay with me here, because what I'm saying is that they are going to come to a day where they are looking blue in the face, how they have seriously harmed hundreds, if not thousands of people and minors because of their need to trans everyone. Like, what the hell? It's just... Can you imagine if there was a world where kids, you know, aged 11, 12 said to their parent, I think I might be gay. And then these doctors just rushing in and saying, we need to take your child away and like do some sort of medical intervention so that his sexuality never changes. That's what it's like. But of course, that would seem insane, right? All right. Listen, everyone, we're at an hour and I had some really crazy woke TikToks lined up. But don't worry, because I'm just going to record that, post it as a separate YouTube video, as I'm trying to I'm trying to be more logical with how long my videos are. Although for those of you who return to my channel, and there are lots of you now, and you really enjoy, if you watch the whole way through, I appreciate it so much. I really do. And my channel is growing slowly, but steadily. So I'm really happy about that. Especially with the last video I did on J.K. Rowling and India Willoughby. If you've not seen, check it out. So many wonderful comments about that. So thank you. And I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, and you are a listener, I would really appreciate it if you could give me a rating on Spotify. It will just take 1 second. And or Apple Podcasts. If on Apple you are feeling extra generous, you could write a review, because I don't have many reviews on those. So I'd really love that. So what are you waiting for? But otherwise, if you liked it, please subscribe, like the video, comment down below. What are your thoughts on WPATH? Do you think that perhaps any of this scandal has been overinflated and it's not as bad as we think? Are you worried about how this may affect happy trans people? More importantly, do you think that this treatment should be offered to anyone? I'm very curious to hear what you think. And with that said, I will see you in the next episode. I'm going to be interviewing Phil Illy, who is the autogynephile expert, has a book on it. I've already recorded it, actually. It was an amazing conversation. And we also react to some YouTubers who are potentially LGBT deniers. So look forward to that one, and I will see you in the next one.